a Soviet spy mission, or something else.
Whatever this was not supposed to be in that area.
For the first time on television, the team brings the key eyewitness forward to analyze declassified audio recordings.
We have an object now over the field,
which reveal there's another side to this bizarre story.
You're UFO officer? Yes, sir.
Right there.
That's fascinating.
They're calling for the UFO officer.
Why was there a UFO officer at Edwards Air Force Base? And why did he scramble a jet to intercept these objects?
Target on your right, one on your left. He's climbing.
Will these tapes and the official radar images from that night finally provide the answer? This is case number 65102, Code Red. It's 1965, Edwards Air Force Base, located just 100 miles northeast of Los Angeles, California. This is the center of the U.S. military's top-secret flight test programs. But on this day, Edwards' highly restricted airspace is penetrated by objects of unknown origin. Objects that continue to hover just outside the base for 6 hours. Most UFO sightings are solitary encounters, but this is not a normal sighting. 9 different locations are a part of this astonishing incident. The Edwards Flight Control Tower, where the first visual contact is reported. Edwards main runway, where the strange object is confirmed visually for a second time. Edwards Radar Approach Control, which reports no aircraft in the area. The Los Angeles Air Defense Sector, which checks its local radar contacts and finds that 4 of their radar installations across Southern California have confirmed radar hits. Boron, Riverside, Victorville, and San Pedro. And finally, an F-106A Delta Dart, which is scrambled in an attempt to engage the objects. Something is happening in Southern California involving 5 military installations, and the entire event was captured on tape.
We supposedly are having quite an invasion over here.
This was an incredible night. In October 1965, the night the UFOs invaded our airspace. And we're hearing this firsthand with the guy who was actually in the tower that night narrating it. This is unbelievable evidence.
The incident is first reported by an air traffic controller in the Edwards Flight Control Tower, Technical Sergeant Chuck Sorrells.
I saw a real bright object, large, out to the east of the field, and it sat there for a long period of time.
In a rare television appearance, former Sergeant Chuck Sorrells, the Edwards Air Force Base tower controller from that night, has come forward to discuss the event and, for the first time ever, analyze the actual audio recordings from October 7th, 1965.
I can make out red and white flashing light.
Sorrells is responsible for all of the air traffic in and around Edwards from within the control tower. He has 12 years of experience in directing all types of military aircraft, and he is aware of most, if not all, of the different models at Edwards Air Force Base. But he is about to witness something that he has never seen before, and he can't explain.
It's happened about 1:30 in the morning. First I saw a real bright object. I got a couple other people down to base operations, the weatherman, 2 or 3 other people there on the base that would be on duty that night. They come out and take a look at it, and yeah, they were seeing the same thing I was seeing.
We have an object now over the field. He is right over the field, right over Edwards, moving southward. I can make out red and white flashing light. And the captain at Step 1 has confirmed this.
It was too low to be a star or anything like that. It was less than 5,000 feet. And this went on for quite some time.
According to him, the object is light green with a pulsating red light at its base, and the object is both large and bright.
3 more of these objects show up, and they're smaller, about half of the size of the original one. And they stayed together. They were like in a formation, or at least close together, like in a V. They went down pretty much to the south of the base. At some point there's 3 more appeared. These 3 are like independent flyers. They fly north, south, east, west, and all that. This goes on from like 1:30 or so when I spotted the first one, someone up till daylight and started getting light.
The team from UFO magazine gathers at March Air Force Base, approximately 90 miles south of the original sighting and the site of radar contact with the objects in 1965, to meet with Sorrells. The full audio recordings of the entire 6-hour 1965 event have been made available and are presented here for the first time.
Pat, Chuck, Bill Scott, Ted Eckworth, and I are going over to review the audio cassettes of the transmissions that night, and then afterwards, you and Chuck and Jeff are going to go over the radar and the maps.
Excellent.
So let's go.
Sounds good to me.
Let's get to it.
Edwards Air Force Base, 1965. A number of objects are sighted coming near the base. The entire event is recorded in tower conversations from Chuck Sorrells.
These transmissions were formerly classified and thought lost. Now they may be able to piece together one of the most incredible cases of a UFO encounter ever recorded. The team is joined by former U.S. Air Force flight test engineer Bill Scott to help analyze the now declassified audio recordings.
These are the actual transmissions, the communications between the defense sector going on that night while the UFOs were in the air over Edwards. This is an incredible audio.
That's correct. And these were recorded from the Los Angeles Air Defense Sector.
The team cues up the transmissions, taking them back to October 7th, 1965.
Look to the north of us, there's one coming pretty fast. And he's coming from north to south. North to south at this time from Edwards? Right, he's blinking red. I have another red light and green light combination in sight, moving very rapidly over the field this time. I'm going to check with my RAPCON to see if they have any movement in that area.
Sorrells in the tower calls RAPCON, the radar approach control, to check if they see anything.
Say, have you all had any reports of unknown flying objects over there? We supposedly are having quite an invasion over here.
At this point, RAPCON has no aircraft in their area, but reports of these mysterious objects continue to come in to the tower at Edwards.
Will you do us a favor? We're looking for about 7 UFOs. We're not positive. This is coming from Edwards and George. How far in here? There are about 7 of them. They're red, white, and green flashing lights. They have been sighted visually. We wonder if you're painting them. We're trying to get a cross-section here.
The objects are confirmed by 5 independent military radar installations, but identifying these objects won't be so easy.
I watched the two look at it through the glasses, and at first appearance it looked just like a star. Yeah. And then it started, it was white and green. It's flashing white and green, similar to what aircraft anti-collision lights would do.
But at this point, you believe these are not aircraft collision lights?
Oh, I know they're not.
Planes have anti-collision lights on the wingtips, top and bottom of the fuselage, and vertical tail fin. From the cockpit view, they are green on the right and red on the left. The colors let other pilots know if the aircraft is approaching them or going away.
I know it wasn't an aircraft. I know it wasn't a helicopter. I know it wasn't a balloon. I know it wasn't a star. I know it wasn't any test aircraft that I knew of at the time. And we had plenty of test aircraft at Edwards.
While it is possible that the lights seen that night could have been top-secret tests of a new craft, Sorrells discounts that theory.
They would have had to have notified me if they were going to fly anything in my control zone so that I could keep other aircraft away from it, if for no other reason, just for safety reasons.
So even if this was a mysterious test, Chuck would have had to have known.
Sorrells mentioned several secret programs at Edwards during this period. If it was at Edwards, it was most likely secret.
We tested all the new aircraft that come through Edwards for testing. The SR-71, the Blackbird, was in testing at that time. The B-70 was there at that time.
Even if it was a highly classified aircraft, they definitely wouldn't have done it in that area without notifying the controllers on duty.
It's not that they would tell the tower nothing, they would just tell the tower there was something going on.
There's no way they would operate in that zone without Chuck knowing about it.
The tower at Edwards and multiple other military radar sites confirm several objects are invading the airspace over Edwards Air Force Base.
He's climbing. Much higher, much higher. Rising rapidly. It looks like it's right above. Right.
So many unidentified contacts at the height of the Cold War, when a Soviet missile attack was a very real fear. The decision to launch intercept aircraft would surely come soon. But on the tape, the authority to launch an investigatory flight seemed to be in the hands of an officer with a most unusual title.
All of the bases had a UFO officer.
You're a UFO officer? Yes, sir. Use caution.
The team is reconstructing the incident above Edwards Air Force Base that occurred on October 7th, 1965. Starting at 1:30 a.m., an object with strange pulsating lights is hovering near the base's rocket test site. And 6 smaller objects have joined it. 3 moving in formation to the south, and another 3 moving about the base freely. 5 Southern California military radar stations capture the event.
I'm getting some reports for Edwards Tower, Victorville Tower, and several radar sites about the UFOs.
The team not only has the key eyewitness to the event, the base's senior air traffic controller, Chuck Sorrells, but now, for the first time on television, the previously classified complete audio tapes from that night's radio and telephone communications.
I have another red light and green light combination in sight, moving very rapidly.
On that evening, after making repeated visual contact for over an hour, Sorrells gets on the phone to LADS, the Los Angeles Air Defense Sector. He discovers that they are now also in radar contact with the objects.
ASO LADS here. Say, have you all had any reports of unknown flying objects over there?
The people at LADS got involved. They were in charge of the air defense of the area. They was getting radar paints on it, and I had a visual on it. George Tower had a visual on it. There were several people on the ground on the Edwards that had visuals on it. Through the period of talking back and forth with LADS, we decided to scramble an aircraft.
At 2 a.m., Edwards alert pilot Captain Darrell Clark is notified of the incursion. He goes outside next to runway aircraft with a radio and binoculars to get a clear view. He makes visual contact. This is his voice when he gets on the radio and reports what he is seeing.
I got a good look at it with the binoculars. It looks like a fairly low altitude.
2 trained military men, one an air traffic controller, the other an experienced pilot. Both believe these are not typical aircraft. But these descriptions aren't enough for the people at LADS to take the next step. They will need to speak with a very specific officer to determine if they should launch an aircraft to intercept the objects.
The lieutenant is the UFO responsible officer in bed. Do you want us to shake this lieutenant out of the bed and see if he wants to request going up and looking?
So right there,
That's fascinating.
they're calling for the UFO officer at the base.
The lieutenant is the UFO responsible responsible officer in bed.
I believe back in those days that every base had a designated UFO officer.
According to the Air Force, quote, investigators from the Foreign Technology Division may have been called unofficially UFO officer. But this is not a term that was ever used by the USAF to denote an official position.
In my 9 years in the Air Force, I never heard of a UFO officer.
Are they looking for extraterrestrial flying saucers,
Right,
or
just a flying saucer officer.
or any object that was unable to be identified? I mean, there's a difference there.
I don't know that they were looking for any particular shape or size or anything like that. It was just anything that was out of the ordinary that would be called an unidentified flying object.
At the onset of World War I, the U.S. Army formed a foreign data section to study the aviation capabilities and progress of the powers in Europe. By World War II, the division became the Technical Data Laboratory, based at Wright-Patterson Field. The group assessed captured enemy equipment and aircraft. After the war, the division merged into a Scientific and Technical Intelligence Group, T2 Intelligence, with a primary goal to, quote, ensure the prevention of strategic, tactical, or technological surprise from any source. As the Cold War escalated, their primary focus was Russia. However, in 1947, this division studied the emerging UFO phenomena under Project Sign, and in 1952, this division created Project Blue Book for the continued study of UFOs. In 1961, the division was officially changed to the Foreign Technology Division. FTD personnel are not assigned to every base, only those which fall under their purview, according to the Air Force. Quote, it would not be unusual for FTD personnel to be at Edwards, given that Edwards functions as the test base for USAF aircraft and other aircraft, including foreign aircraft. This officer would be consulted whenever something unidentified was sighted, whether this was a suspected Soviet craft or any other object that was not immediately recognized by Edwards personnel.
Objects that can't be identified, you don't know what they are, have penetrated airspace over Edwards Air Force Base and have gotten close to the runways. Why haven't we dispatched planes?
This doesn't happen very often. They were having to sort of explore it on the fly here as to what the regulations are, who had the authority to do what. So this is an unusual event.
I would imagine back then it was just a fly by the seat of your pants type thing. I had no particular policy to go by or anything to tell me what to do. You had to make a decision and act on it.
What these objects might be is still open for discussion. But with no protocol in place and the objects seeming to pose no immediate threat, it's determined that no further action can take place until the UFO officer contacts the tower.
They are scrambling their UFO officer out of the pad and see if he wants to request space ops going up and looking.
In the radio transmissions and in the phone conversations, we suddenly find out, wait a minute, Edwards had a UFO officer? What did the UFO officer do? Was he looking for flying saucers? Well, even if he was not looking for flying saucers, but only in charge of whatever unknown objects were up there, still, this is breaking news, that despite all the denials of the Air Force, and I mean year after year they would deny that UFOs are real, they have a UFO officer.
At 3 a.m., over 90 minutes after the initial sighting, the UFO officer contacts the tower and attempts to determine the origin of these objects with the Los Angeles Air Defense Sector. LADS has confirmed radar sightings from 5 different points around Edwards.
You want to get any balloons out of Edwards? Any balloons? Yeah. Not that I know of. Edwards don't have a Raven sign unit. So I doubt if they lynched anything, they wouldn't have no reason to. They wouldn't have any reason to send balloons out of section anyway. Out of Edwards, huh? No. I see.
That was the director down at Los Angeles Sector talking to the weatherman on Edwards and asking had they launched a balloon. And he said, no, we don't have a Ravenson site, which is a weather site that sends up balloons and does that kind of thing. We had no reason to do it.
Edwards don't have a Ravenson unit. They have no reason to launch any weather balloons.
So he plainly says on the tape, they did not launch a balloon. Okay. However, in the written report of this thing, it plainly states that a balloon was launched from there that night. In reality, it didn't happen, but it's in the classified written report.
The official United States Air Force report clearly dismisses the multiple accounts as sightings of a weather balloon. If these objects were in fact weather balloons, why the next decision? To scramble a fighter jet. And what did that jet see?
There was approximately 5 to 7 objects. They are quickly moving. They would be stationary for some time, then quickly move straight up.
On October 7th, 1965, multiple eyewitnesses report several objects above Edwards Air Force Base. A formerly classified document from the United States Air Force clearly states that this object was a weather balloon, although according to the tower audio, Edwards was not capable of launching such a craft.
You launching any balloons out of Edwards? Any balloons? Yeah. Not that I know of. Edwards don't have a Ravenson unit, so I doubt if they launched anything. They wouldn't have no reason to.
But the UFO officer who has recently contacted the tower is looking for a more rational explanation and continues to pursue the weather balloon theory.
It's very hard for a balloon to go from north to south at a low altitude when I report the wind is out of the west at 2 knots. If the wind is out of the west and one of them is going north to south and then turned west, it'd be very difficult for a balloon to turn into the wind.
So what we're saying here is they don't have the flight characteristics of a balloon. There's a report that no balloons were launched that night, and yet in the classified report, there's a report of a balloon that's being launched.
In fact, according to the report, the objects are described as weather balloons 3 times, despite all the evidence to the contrary.
And these kinds of weather balloons that they were looking for, are they typically lit?
No.
Do they have marking lights?
No.
The only other explanation offered by the UFO officer is that this object could have been a man-made aircraft, contradicting what is reported by Sorrells and the alert pilot on the runway, Darrell Clark. Sorrells makes his opinion known.
The UFO officer saw this. He thinks it's an airplane. I do not.
The UFO officer said it looked like an airplane to him. He is not a trained pilot. He is not a trained anything other than he was a UFO officer assigned to. I don't know what his normal duty was. But here you got an air traffic controller that says it's not an airplane. You got an alert pilot standing on the ground that says it's not an airplane. But the UFO officer thinks it's an airplane.
Now, Bill, do you think that part of the UFO's officer's job is to say things are airplanes? Remember, the Air Force was in the UFO business, the flying saucer business, in 1965. They didn't get at it until 1969. So do you think part of that person's job was to discount these things and not pass along stuff to Blue Book?
I think that's speculation, Bill. I'm with Chuck that the guy was not trained. He had probably no aviation-related duties whatsoever. And all he knew about airplanes was that they had a red light, a green light, and a white light. And he said, looks like an airplane to me. There was no conspiracy, it was just flat inexperience, and he didn't know what he was talking about.
Whether the object is an airplane or something else, the consensus in 1965 is that they need to get a closer look at whatever is hovering in restricted airspace. But the only live planes at Edwards are armed with nuclear weapons, which require high-level authorization to launch. These alert birds are specifically designated to protect the U.S. from an incoming attack. They are armed with nuclear weapons in the event that an immediate strike or counterstrike is necessary. To launch one of these nuclear-armed F-106s over U.S. airspace is far too risky without knowing anything further about these objects.
We can't use one of your alert birds. Well, do you have another 106? Oh, that's all we have. That's all you have. That's all we have is the
I suppose by this time it's getting on toward 4 o'clock in the morning. I imagine that it's been going on for 2.5, 3 hours by this time. But because the time the bird got up and got in position and tried to make a run on it, the things had risen in altitude, they had moved in their position, they weren't near as visible as they once were.
Do you think that somebody was holding it back, or do you think this was normal procedure?
Oh, this would be normal procedure because they didn't have a bird that was not armed, and they didn't have a pilot to fly it.
We had one on greater than 1 hour, but I believe that's just because we don't have a pilot here for it. We'd have to have an authentication on the scramble with the weapon board.
They couldn't take the alert guy in case he had to go with the alert bird. So they had to get an additional pilot that wasn't even on duty at the time. They had to go rack somebody out of the bed to get him down there to fly the airplane.
Listen, this bird is taking off. Is that a hot bird? No, he's not loading.
When the go-ahead to launch a plane to intercept is finally given, the turnaround time is significant, as it is after 3 a.m., and the pilot and ground crew have to be awoken to get the bird in the air.
They were geared to look out, to look for Russian airplanes coming in from the water, basically. This is inside our own airspace, so procedures really aren't laid out there.
As the bird gets up into the air, both Lads and Sorrells guide the pilot to get closer to the objects. But there's a problem. By this time, they have started to move away from the base.
He went up to take a look at it, and they run radar intercept on it, and they were having a hard time getting him, in the area. At one point, I was directing the aircraft. I would line him up with the runway, give him a heading.
Have him come right down the runway. Operator 01, starboard 040.
At one point, they run him through as high as 40,000 feet. And I was talking to the director, and he was asking me, how's he doing? I said, well, he's closing on it.
01, you should hold at 1 flip now. Target on your right, 1 on your left.
And then as he got closer, I said, he's low.
Tower, how's things look now? He's low. Look, search high.
And the thing is rising very fast.
That thing is rising.
Well, he's at 40,000 feet. I said, I don't care, he's still low.
He's way low. Way low. We're at 40,000 feet. Still low.
But as the pilot gets closer, the objects get further and further away until they finally disappear, out of visual contact and out of radar contact.
He has moved now to approximately 145 degrees, estimated 40 miles, and very, very high now. It is almost invisible now.
What is your estimate of this?
I think it was an unusual incident for all professionals involved. The only unprofessional I heard in there was a UFO officer. He's the only one that thought it was an airplane.
The declassified tapes are just the beginning. The alert pilot, Captain Clark, who never spoke of this incident beyond that night and could never know it would be investigated in the future, would eventually write a letter to his wife elaborating on what he saw that night in October.
Captain Clark? Yes. What do you think of it? Well, I'll tell you, when I first saw the thing, it was approaching the base from the north.
All I could see was the pulsating, not rotating, light.
I got a good look at it with the binoculars. It seems to be pushing a little cloud in front of it.
The team has just heard declassified recordings of an incident above Edwards Air Force Base on October 7, 1965.
This is the tower in Edwards. We have an object now moving southward.
Chuck Sorrells, the senior air traffic controller at the base that evening, has shed new light on the strange objects that were found hovering for almost 6 hours in restricted airspace. But Sorrells and the recordings are not the only sources for the story behind what the Air Force refers to as the incident. Captain Darrell Clark was the alert pilot at Edwards Air Force Base that evening.
It looked like a fairly low altitude, probably 10,000 feet.
His voice is on the audio tapes.
It turned a little bit more westerly and gained a tremendous amount of altitude.
After decades of silence, Clark feels compelled to document his experience from that fateful night in a letter to his wife.
The important thing about this letter is that Captain Darrell Clark was the senior ranking officer on duty, and his account corroborates Chuck Sorrell's account. Both men kept this a secret for as long as they could. Obviously, this incident had played on his mind for decades before he decided to share the secret with someone.
This letter was given to the UFO hunters by Sam Sherman, the architect of the reconstructed audio transmissions from Edwards that night. Sherman obtained it directly from Clark's son.
I was on alert at Edwards Air Force Base in California and was the senior ranking officer on duty. At about 0200 hours, I got a call from the senior controller. He said they had reports of UFOs and had some radar contacts.
Hello, this is Captain Clark, Alpha Lima. Okay, Captain Clark, Lieutenant Reed. We have some confirmed reports of some unidentified flying objects in your area. Okay.
As I scanned the sky, I observed a pulsating light to the northwest of my position, moving south at about 1,000 feet above the ground and around 300 knots. The UFO never leveled off. It continued to climb. It appeared to move right out into space until it finally passed out of view. Darrell A. Clark.
The incident was also whispered about the following day amongst those on the base who hadn't witnessed the event. Test pilot George Merritt was stationed at Edwards at the time and remembers the energy surrounding this story.
My name is George Merritt. I was a graduate of the Air Force Test Pilot School at Edwards Air Force Base. Well, when I came into work the next morning, there was a buzz going on about these strange lights that had been seen south of the base late in the evening and into the early morning. And so everybody is talking just like the TV program from the night before. What was it? What do you think it was?
And Merritt confirms why it took the Air Force so long to scramble a bird to take a closer look.
Starting with the president down, they have to determine at that level, Pentagon level, that there is a threat and we want these nuke-armed interceptors to take off, identify, and shoot them down. You take that very, very serious. These lights are presenting no hazard to Edwards Air Force Base. There is nobody dropping bombs, nobody firing missiles, shooting guns, no parachutes coming out, nothing that is a threat to Edwards, nor is there at this time to the air defense of the United States.
The report goes to someone called a base UFO officer, correct?
This Captain John Balint.
Captain John Balint.
Who was part of the Foreign Technology Division out of Wright-Patterson. And foreign technology, that means that there's classified secret things going on at Edwards that he needs to review and report to his higher headquarters. He is the one that wrote the official Air Force report, signed it, and it went up through the chain of command. And so that is the official report of this. That was not written by an Edwards person.
This official Air Force report was the same report that dismissed one of the objects as a weather balloon. Could this, in fact, be classified technology that Balint was not allowed to reveal or didn't know about? During his initial reconstruction of the audio tapes, Sam Sherman contacted Balint to discuss the incident, but Balint refused comment and was not interested in participating in Sherman's investigation.
My take on it was that a year and a half earlier, when I was a student in the test pilot school, President Johnson announced that the YF-12 Blackbird was at Edwards. I saw one of them taxi in. First time I'd ever seen the Blackbird, knew nothing about Groom Lake, nothing about Area 51, and here the most magnificent fighter aircraft I had ever seen comes taxiing in, and I'm a fighter pilot. You'd think I'd know about it, but I didn't know about it.
So what did that plane have to do with the UFO incident?
Well, so my first feeling is if there's some kind of lights out there, and it is in fact some kind of a vehicle, it's probably a classified program. The restricted area, the area where we as test pilots did all of our flight test, was in what's called the Edwards restricted area, the same one that we have right now, 2512. And it starts about 5 or 6 miles south of the runway and runs to the west, runs to the north, and runs to the east. So the testing area for our aircraft were all north of the Edwards area, Edwards base.
According to Merritt, the flight path of all classified technology at Edwards would take place in a specific area north of the base. But this does not match the reported locations and flight paths of the UFOs.
The official report from the Air Force said that these were
unidentified lights that were seen at Edwards.
Okay, so that's where it stood, even though Captain Valent said that these were planes.
Well, they're just unidentified. That's about all you can say.
But he still believes that there is more to this case.
I'm personally very happy that they've reopened the case of the unidentified flying object that went past Edwards. It's been something I've wondered about for 40 years myself.
Are these UFOs that are repeatedly entering restricted military airspace? And what did Chuck Sorrells, Darrell Clark, and the lab's radar stations actually make contact with on October 7th, 1965?
We're looking for about 7 UFOs.
The team examines the final piece of the Edwards puzzle, the radar readings from the Los Angeles Air Defense Sector.
It looks like multiple targets there.
With eyewitnesses, declassified recordings, and handwritten never-before-seen testimony, the team has uncovered a mountain of evidence regarding the night of October 7th, 1965 at Edwards Air Force Base.
I'm getting some reports for Edwards Tower, Victorville Tower, and several radar sites about the UFOs.
Their final step is to authenticate the official radar images from the San Pedro radar station that evening. Images that the official report later discount as anomalous weather propagation. This phenomenon is caused by a temperature inversion. The Earth's atmosphere usually cools as elevation rises, but an inversion can sometimes occur, where the temperature either does not cool or, in some extreme cases, gets warmer with height. When this occurs, this warmer layer acts like a lid, which can lead to haze or pollution being trapped beneath this layer, resulting in false radar hits.
Edwards is observing them from the ground. 2 towers observing them, and we're calculating height and radar, and we have a track on them.
Radar analyst John Kirk is assisting the team in authenticating the radar and discussing theories on what else these objects might have been.
I'm about to meet a radar systems engineer, John Kirk, who has radar experience from the military and has worked with radar for over 50 years.
My name is John Kirk. I'm a radar systems engineer.
These are the actual images from the radar displays at Fort MacArthur, taken in San Pedro during that evening in 1965. The images were taken at intervals, creating a visual timeline that tracks the object's movement throughout the entire incident.
They're moving slowly and climbing slowly, and they have been confirmed on radar.
You look at the images and they're pretty standard. I mean, this is a display. These are just markers on it. So what this tells me is that this radar was looking, it did pick up some moving targets. It did put some information on them.
On the actual radar image, these areas are identified by Kirk as moving targets.
So we got multiple targets here.
Looks like there's multiple targets, and as you cycle through some of these things, you'll see the pictures changing. It looks like there's maybe 1, 2, 3. My guess is there's about 4, 5, 6 targets.
Kirk counts 6 targets on the radar image, but still, this does not discount the theories of anomalous propagation.
Well, anomalous propagation could be caused by a weather.
Okay.
An inversion or something that's going on, clouds coming in, some moisture in the air. There's a lot of atmospheric anomaly.
Does it make any sense to you what it could possibly be? No, we're in as much as dark-eyed as you are.
It's hard for me to think that that's anomalous propagation. If there was anomalous propagation, you'd think you'd see more of a blob rather than an individual.
So this doesn't look like anomalous propagation?
It looks like individual things.
According to Kirk, anomalous propagation would appear as a blob, while these images appear to be independent targets.
It looks like targets.
Yeah, it looked like targets to me. Yeah, what kind, I can't say.
Okay.
I have no idea. It just looked like there's targets out there, and then the radars are working like they're supposed to be working.
In addition, 5 separate radar sites wouldn't pick up the same false reading at the same time. While Kirk cannot speculate what the objects could have been, he is impressed with the amount of evidence surrounding this story.
For a pilot to write down, this is what I saw, for an operator to say this is what I saw. It's a lot of collaborative information. I can't refute it, but just on the basis of these, they do look like real tracks.
Okay.
It doesn't look like it would be anomalous propagation. These look like they're real.
So there are 3 definite objects. It's not weather, it's not flutter. They see the object, but they don't see, they're not aircraft. No, they can't tell what they are.
Former National Weather Service meteorologist William Puckett also has evidence that suggests these radar images cannot be explained away by anomalous propagation. On the night of October 7th, 1965, according to the National Climatic Data Center, the atmosphere was very dry and had no temperature inversions, 2 key characteristics that can create these false radar hits. Without these conditions present, the likelihood of the radar hits being anomalous propagation is close to 0. The surface weather at Edwards from midnight to 6 a.m. also shows clear skies, mild temperatures, and little to no wind. Visibility is estimated to be 35 miles. With these factors, the distortion or misidentification of celestial objects such as Jupiter, Saturn, or other stars is highly unlikely. But after the incident and the subsequent investigation into it, the military decided to seal all the records and audio concerning the case. Their explanation was that the radar hits were false positives and that the eyewitnesses had merely misidentified celestial objects, despite the overwhelming evidence ruling these theories out.
You know, it's just amazing to me to hear that possibly we have UFOs penetrating secure airspace, military airspace, in the United States with impunity. According to the account, both on the tapes, the radar traces, and Sorrell's account of it, that it was exceeding any known flight envelope characteristics of any aircraft of that time or since.
It is much, much higher than when we first observed it.
These audio recordings of actual events sent chills down my spine.
I have another red light and green light combination in sight, moving very rapidly.
When you sit down and you listen to all the people that were involved, there were a whole bunch of voices in that chatter that did not know what was going on.
Of course, around Edwards, you'll never see most anything.
The audio is the smoking gun.
He's climbing. Much higher, much higher. Rising rapidly. It looks like it's right above.
They classified the tape. For 30 years, what was on the tape that had to be classified? Secret weapons? No. Special radar? No. What it was UFOs.
Over 40 years later, the incident at Edwards Air Force Base continues to be unexplained. Today, the Air Force Flight Test Center's motto is Ad Inexplorata, toward the unexplored. A fitting description for that night in October, perhaps the most compelling and little-known sighting of a UFO known to date.